Welcome, everybody. And thank you for being here for part 2 of Ask Me Anything ALS, tracheostomies. My name is Michael Lecker. I am the community organizing and outreach lead. I've been here for about 2 years. And so tonight we are going to hear from some incredible panelists who are going to share their experiences and their knowledge with you. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction to what is I AM ALS. So I AM ALS is a patient-centric movement revolutionizing how to end diseases. The nonprofit, we are a nonprofit that provides critical support and resources to people with ALS, caregivers, and their loved ones. We empower advocates to raise awareness and lead the movement against ALS and driving the development of treatments and cures. I AM ALS was founded just a couple of years ago in 2019 by husband and wife team, Brian Wallach and Sandra Breva. I AM ALS was born out of their desire to rewrite the ALS story for Brian and the tens of thousands of other people living with ALS. And if you want to learn more, you can go to our website, iamals.org, which I am assuming you all know because you signed up for this event. So without anything, first I'm going to also introduce the concept of what is Ask Me Anything ALS. So Ask Me Anything ALS was born out of one of our meetings where people wanted a space for the community to share expertise with itself. So this particular Ask Me Anything ALS tracheostomy was born out of Shelley Hoover's desire to bring people together to have this conversation. So that is to say that we are community-centric and to our core. If you have an idea for an Ask Me Anything or would like to participate in anything, you can reach out to Blake or myself. Our emails are pretty easy to crack. It is michael@iamals.org and blake@iamals.org. I'll put that in the chat just in case, but I will now turn it over to my co-conspirator, Blake.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share a little bit more information about how today will flow, and then I'll introduce the panelists. So we encourage everyone, like last time, to use the chat feature or to raise your hand to ask a question if you want to participate in the discussion. We'll read the chat in real time. And then we'll also track any questions that are submitted in the chat to make sure that we get to them on top of the questions that were submitted when people registered. To raise your hand, you can just go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and hover over and click on the reactions icon and then click raise hand. And then we will do our best to keep everyone in order of when they raise their hands and when questions were submitted. We're not perfect, but we'll do our best on that. We also just ask that you mute yourself if you're not speaking, and that'll just allow for the discussion to flow without any interruptions or background noise. What else? As we shared in the sign-up form, we will be recording this. It's being recorded right now. So if you don't wish to have your name mentioned and you want to submit a question, just please let us know when you submit that question. Otherwise, what we typically do is we'll read say Hope submitted a question, we'll read Hope has asked XYZ. So just let us know when you submit that question if you don't want to have your name read. And finally, any links that are shared in the chat today will be shared out post-event. So don't worry about trying to open a bunch of different tabs as information is shared. We'll be sure to get that to everyone post-event. Now I'm going to pass it over to Hope, who is on the call, and will share a little bit of information about her role and why she's here today.
Thank you, Blake. Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Fueling. I'm a community navigator with I AM ALS. So the navigation team works to support individuals impacted by ALS with their emotional and practical needs. This can include in facilitating access to information involving understanding ALS and care options, clinical trials, insurance and legal assistance, assistive devices and equipment needs, amongst other services. So if you have any ALS related needs that we cannot directly assist with, we do our best to connect you with the person or organization that can. I know that ALS can feel overwhelming to navigate and talk about at times. So I'm here today to provide emotional support and resources as our wonderful panel facilitates a second conversation regarding tracheostomies. Please know that anyone joining this call can reach out to me using the chat feature at any time. If you have any questions or would like any support, I'll also be reaching out to people sporadically throughout the call. If you would like to connect with myself or one of my navigation colleagues after this call, we would be honored to support you. You can email us at gethelp@iamals.org. And I am sure Michael is already typing it up to drop it in the chat. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Hope. I'm gonna move your spotlight. There we go. Great. So as we did last time, we have a whole bunch of panelists who are going to take the time to share their story and share information about themselves. And then we'll dive into questions that were submitted in the chat, that were submitted during registration, and others that pop up when people raise their hands or unmute. So I will go ahead and intro all our panelists, and we're excited this time because we're joined by caregivers as well, which is why there are so many amazing faces on the screen today. So I'll start with Gil. Gil Garcia is a veteran of the U.S. Navy and was diagnosed with ALS in November of 2015. He lives in Floresville, Texas, with his wife of 23 years, Egma. He's also the father of 3 adult children, and he's the founder and co-lead of the I AM ALS veterans team and spends most of his time as an ALS advocate. Chanel Hobbs lives in Chester, Virginia, with her husband, Lamont, and they have 2 young adult daughters. At age 39 in June 2008, Chanel was diagnosed with ALS. She still works full-time as a deputy comptroller for the State Corporation Commission and is an ALS advocate. And she's joined by Lamont today, who is her husband and her high school sweetheart. They have been married for 28 years, and he's a pastor and a real estate broker. He owns his own real estate firm. But even with his busy schedule, he is Chanel's primary caregiver. And on a daily basis, he provides his family strength, support, faith, and positivity. And he never lets their ALS journey steal his joy. Lamont, we're glad to have you this time around. And then we have Steve Ziegler. Steve is a native of Florissant, Missouri, where he lives with his wife, Lynn, and his 10-year-old son, Lucas. He was diagnosed with ALS in 2015, and a year and a half later was quadriplegic and became dependent on non-invasive ventilation 24/7. This past November, after 5.5 years on non-invasive ventilation, he transitioned to invasive ventilation. He still is working using his eye gaze as a computer programmer and spends his free time attending his son's many sporting events. He participates in a variety of ALS organizations' awareness and advocacy efforts. And Steve's joined by his wife, Lynn, today. Lynn is his sole caregiver. And when Steve was diagnosed in 2015, they had been dating for about 4 months, and Lynn was 25 years old. She stepped into the role of his primary caregiver as his symptoms progressed. She is now 32 and has been taking care of Steve for a little over 7 years. Throughout his progression, the way they manage his care has constantly adapted to his changing condition. The most recent and significant change has been learning to care for tracheostomy and manage the invasive ventilation. Lynn, we're glad to have you. Shelly is next. Shelly is a Navy veteran and has been living with ALS for 9 years. She volunteers on the I AM ALS veterans and legislative community teams. She's a retired public school administrator, an author, a grandma of 5, and in her 2nd year of law school, and she lives in Raleigh, California. And today, Shelly is joined by Steve Hoover, her husband. Steve is a Navy veteran and her primary caregiver. He's a former executive at a software company and now owns and operates a small business with their son, David, that provides DME care for disabled veterans. And he lives near Raleigh, North Carolina as well. And Garrett is next with the amazing background. Steve, we're glad to have you, by the way. Garrett is a Navy veteran of 13 years and was deployed to Iraq in 2007 and Afghanistan in 2012. He has a wife and 3 kids and is currently living in the spinal cord unit at the Milwaukee VA until he can find caregiver support. He was diagnosed with bulbar ALS in June of 2017 and has been advocating for veterans ever since. He's also a member of the I AM ALS veterans team. And finally, we have Kevin. Kevin Swan was diagnosed with ALS in February of 2012 and founded a Life Story Foundation in April of that same year. Before focusing 100% of his time on finding a cure for this horrible disease by way of storytelling, He was the director of communications for Single Hop, a rapidly growing infrastructure service provider located in Chicago. Kevin's tenacity and ability to always see the positive side of every situation are at the core of the foundation's mission to completely abolish this disease. I'm glad to have you too, Kevin. I believe I got everyone. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Gil to tip us off with sharing more about yourself and your experience.
Hey everyone, I'm glad you all made time to join us again this evening. My experience is mine alone. You will see a varying perspective from each person here. As for me, I have had a mostly positive experience. I'm still here, which I attribute to having the procedure. I really believe that I would not be here today if not for choosing to be trached. There have been peaks and valleys, but overall, I have no regrets. I am going on 7 years living with ALS. I still have much to live for and do on this earth. Since being trached, I have seen my son get married. My other son graduated from university, and I plan on being here to see my daughter, my youngest, graduate from university as well. Who knows what the future holds, but I know that my odds of being there have increased by choosing this path.
Thanks, Gil. Chanel, we'll pass it over to you and Lamont.
Excellent. Just 1 second.
I was diagnosed with ALS in June 2008. It started with tripping, drop foot and falling. It eventually progressed. I don't remember my FVC scores, but they declined also. The ALS clinic recommended using the BiPAP at night. I attempted to use it, but it prevented me from communicating. I could still talk, somewhat. I started using it in the evenings, after work, and before bedtime. At this point, in 2012, I was wheelchair bound, could only use left hand, feeding tube, but was physically going into the workplace every day. I didn't think of the danger I was in, LOL. As far as my breathing, it felt fine to me, even though FVC numbers declined slightly with each visit. The trach had not been suggested yet, thus, I assumed I was okay. Not only had it not been discussed with the neurologist, but my husband and I hadn't discussed it either. I was in my 4th year with ALS and knew the statistics of 2 to 5 years. I don't know if I was in denial, naive, or thought I would not follow the norm, but I didn't think decisions had to be discussed yet. However, I had thought about what I would want, if I ever got to the point of needing trach and vent. I decided, in my mind, no, I didn't want that. I had seen the pals in the clinic with trachs and vents, and it was downright scary looking to me. Just a reminder, this was all in my head, never discussed with anyone. I went to work on that Friday, as usual, On Saturday, my girls and I went with my mom to an aquarium, 90 miles away. Returned home and later that night, my husband was transferring me. I immediately felt like I couldn't breathe and recall him looking at me and asking if he needed to call 911. I said, yes, and fell unconscious. When I woke up, I was intubated. My husband explained that carbon dioxide had built up because my muscles were not strong enough to function normally. I had coded while getting scanned and was put on the vent. Unfortunately, my medical staff was unfamiliar with ILS and said they were going to wean me off of the vent. Based on the numbers, they didn't think I needed it. The day they pulled the tube out, they said, now cough. Oh boy, I had lost the ability to cough over a year ago. My husband is frantically saying I have no ability to cough. I go unconscious, again, and tube gets reinserted. I transfer to a different hospital, and it's determined I must have the trach and vent. Oh, during the transport ride, the vent loses power and paramedics had to bag me for 15 minutes. Lessons from my story: discuss your options with your family and doctors. If you decide on a trach, try to have it as a planned procedure. If an emergency procedure, try to go to a hospital with ILS knowledgeable staff. And lastly, do what you're doing now. Become knowledgeable yourself so that you can advocate for your needs and ask questions. I have no regrets regarding getting a trach and vent. I'm happy to be one of the so-called heavily equipped PALs. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Chanel. Shelley, we've got you next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My story is quite the opposite of Chanel. I learned from the people before me to do it sooner rather than later. So I was able to schedule my surgery without being in a crisis. And so far, things are going well. I have a great nurse and support system to keep me healthy and engaged in life. I do want to say again, there's no right or wrong way to live or die with this disease. Each of us has a very different journey. So a trach may not be for everyone, but also physicians often tell people with ALS not to get a trach. And I think that is a great disservice. Like many of us on the panel, we live a full life. So it can be done. So learn like you are, but don't be afraid. It's not as scary as it looks.
Shelley always has such wise words to share. Thanks, Shelley. Steve, you're up next.
As was mentioned earlier, I had been able to successfully utilize non-invasive ventilation for around 5.5 years. During that time, I had one instance of aspiration pneumonia, where I was in the hospital for a few days and then released. In November of last year, we were on our way home from an out-of-state hockey tournament, and I was having trouble swallowing secretions. Some of it went into my lungs. We tried using the cough assist but were unable to get the secretions out of my lungs. We got home and I went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up having a hard time breathing. We tried the cough assist again with not much success. My oxygen level was dropping and I passed out. My wife called 911. I was intubated and taken to the hospital. I recovered in the hospital for about 4 days. We made the decision to try to take out the intubation and go back on the non-invasive ventilation. We were successful in going back on the non-invasive ventilation initially. However, later on in the day, the nurses were turning me and I aspirated again. We tried more cough assist to get it out but were unsuccessful. At that point we knew that a decision had to be made. We either keep trying non-invasive ventilation, knowing that I could aspirate at any time and go back into respiratory failure, or get the tracheostomy. We opted for the latter. The next day, I had a percutaneous tracheostomy procedure. I spent the next week recovering from the procedure and then they did the first trach change. After that, I spent another week in the hospital while my wife learned how to care for the trach and performed a trach change to prove that she could do it. After 3 weeks in the hospital, I was able to go home. Since then, things have gone well. It took some time to relearn how to do certain things with the trach, like transfers, but we figured it out. I am more comfortable now with the trach because I have a secure airway and we have ways to effectively clear the lungs when secretions get down there. Although we don't get out as much as we used to, we still get out a couple of times a week.
Thanks, Steve. And Garrett?
Meds now. And then 6 o'clock feeding.
I really appreciate everyone on this meeting and pray daily for a successful treatment or cure. When it came time to get a trachea, my breathing was low and having bulbar, it really affected my swallowing and breathing through my nose. I was afraid, but I knew that I wanted to live a longer life and watch my kids grow. I know I made the right decision.
Thanks, Garrett. And for Kevin, I'm just going to reread his bio. We've had a few people join since we did bios anyways. So Kevin was diagnosed with ALS in February of 2012 and founded a Life Story Foundation in April of that year. Before focusing 100% of his time on finding a cure for this disease by way of storytelling, he was a director of communications for Single Hop, a rapidly growing infrastructure service provider located in Chicago. His tenacity and ability to always see the positive side of every situation are at the core of the foundation's mission to completely abolish the disease. I'm going to turn it over to Michael to read the chat, and then we're going to dive into all the questions that have been submitted. So feel free to start adding questions in the chat as well if you have any.
Okay, I'll start with Gil saying, I like that heavily equipped in response to Chanel. And I said, me too, Gil. Kevin said you can read it from the last time about the bio. And then Blake said, will do. And then Kevin said, I can't tell if everyone is frozen or if it is just ALS, and then laughing out loud. And then Gil said, laughing out loud. And Shelly said, too funny, Kevin. And now we'll go into questions, and people have pre-selected which questions they're going to respond to. So these are questions that were submitted. If you do have a question, feel free to either type it in the chat or to raise your hand, or just communicate in some way that you have a question. Garrett says, sucks being in a hospital because you never have privacy, laughing out loud. It's okay, Gil, no apologies, right? Or no sorries. So the first question is for the incredible Gil. Can having a tracheostomy cause problems when in the future, when one chooses hospice? So I'll read that again. Can having a tracheostomy cause problems in the future when one chooses hospice?
I have not found anything that says that the trach will affect hospice care. I do know that much care is being shifted to palliative care, and even hospice has changed to being more long-term. I would say that it is best to discuss this with your medical team for more specifics in your community.
Michael, I saw you on mute. Go ahead. I was just going to add, if there's other panelists, of course, throughout all of this that want to chime in, please feel free to do so. Thank you, Gil, for that answer. And Mary, we've got your question added into this document where we're tracking questions, so we'll get to it in just a moment. Our next question is for Chanel and Shelly. The question is, how often during the day or night do you need to have suction?
I think it really depends on several things. How humid it is outside, or if I have extra phlegm going on. Sometimes at night, I can sleep through the night without suction. Other times it might be 2 or 3 times a night. And during the day, it's every few hours, sometimes more and sometimes less.
Great. Chanel wrote she's having problems getting to her menu. She'll need suctioning. Suctioning needs very daily. Sometimes I may go 4 hours without needing suction, On days when I'm stuffy, I might need every couple of hours. At bedtime, I normally wake up 1 to 2 times during the night needing suction. That can vary also. What I have found to be a lifesaver is the cough assist. I use this less often. I use it when there is congestion in my chest and suction isn't effective. I also use a chest compression machine daily, which keeps the mucus moving and breaks it up. This helps while preventing fluid buildup, which can lead to pneumonia. I also take guaifenesin cough syrup with each feeding, which also helps to keep secretions thin.
Thank you for the question. And then we just got another question from Craig, and Craig, we're going to put that into the lineup, so it'll be coming later on. But I'll read the two questions that we've had submitted so that the panelists can hear them. So Mary said, I had my pre-op appointment with the ENT yesterday and for my upcoming trach. He said they rarely do a speaking valve / passy mirror, but he would consider it for me. Not sure why he and the rest of the team seem to be anti-speaking valve. He really emphasized the decline in quality of life due to inability to speak and increased difficulty in swallowing. In researching valves, it seems like there are a lot of options, but why the docs hesitate to use any of the newer technology? I'm scared that my quality of life will decrease if I do the trach. So we'll get to that question later on, give the panelists time to think about that. And then Craig said, Shelley mentioned in the previous video that she received a particular type of trach. What determines which type a person receives? The reason I ask is because I am using non-invasive ventilation 24/7, and my speech and my ability to swallow are still unaffected. I remove my mask and hold my breath to eat and take pills. Steve wrote, you definitely need to discuss this with your hospice provider. I have heard of some not allowing people on ventilator. It is certainly something to discuss with it before you need it. Gil said, no one can tell you if or how your quality of life will decline or not. Positive attitude is powerful. And then Mary asked, does anyone use the Vosen machine or Voxen machine? It stands for ventilation, oxygen, cough, assist, suction, and nebulizer all in one machine. Any recommendations for or against it? And Mary, I'm gonna put that in the chat. And then Kevin asked, how many people are on the call? And Kevin, there are currently 29. Okay, and so we're gonna get those questions into the lineup. The next question we have is, what is it like to live on a ventilator what is it like to live in a ventilator skilled nursing home? We only hear stories about managing a trach at home, but that's not an option for all people living with ALS. And so we'd like to learn more about quality of life in a facility. Thank you. And Garrett, do you need a moment to respond to that one? Okay, Garrett, we're gonna skip over this question for a second, and Garrett, you just let me know whenever you're ready. And Kevin wrote, it is a lifesaver, the Voxen. Blake, do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah. So the next question was, what specifically is the reason for not being able to be left alone after getting a trach? And this one was for Chanel and Steve.
You will need suctioning, and if you no longer have use of your limbs, you will need someone to do it for you. As previously mentioned, because you don't know when or how often you will need suction, someone will always have to be available. Also, If you are also vented, the vent may unexpectedly come off at any time, and someone will have to put it back on. These are the main reasons you can't be left alone. My husband and I use FaceTime when he has to do something outside or take the dog out. So, there are creative ways your caregiver can get things done and know that you're okay.
There are a few reasons why a person with a trach cannot be left alone. One reason is suctioning. Secretions can get into or be generated by the lungs. If too much of these secretions build up in the lungs, then the ventilator must apply more pressure to inflate the lungs. The ventilator will increase pressure up to a point but won't go higher, to avoid damaging the lungs. At that point, if the lungs need more pressure to fill them but the ventilator will not provide it, then you are not getting enough air. That is a bad thing. This is alleviated by suctioning the secretions out of the lungs with a suction catheter. If a PALS is unable to manage suctioning on their own, then they need to have someone there to suction for them. The second issue would be if any part of the circuit became disconnected. The circuit is just another word for all of the hoses between the ventilator and the trach. While uncommon if you are sitting still, any one of the many connections between the trach and the ventilator can become disconnected. If something is disconnected, then you won't be able to breathe. If the PALS cannot reconnect the circuit on their own, then someone must be there to reconnect it for them. The third reason why someone with a trach cannot be left alone is if the cuff fails. The cuff is a balloon that inflates inside of the trachea that is a part of the trach tube. The cuff makes a seal in the trachea that keeps the secretions and other things from the mouth out of the lungs, and keeps air from the ventilator in the lungs. If the cuff were to malfunction and deflate, which is rare, but can happen, you would need someone there who can change out the trach so you are able to breathe properly again.
Thanks, Steve. Those were both incredibly helpful answers. We're going to move to the questions submitted from the chat. I'm going to reread the whole thing, and then we'll give our panelists some time to answer. So this one was from Mary. I had a pre-op appointment with ENT yesterday for my upcoming trach. He said they rarely do a speaking valve passing mirror, but he would consider it for me. I'm not sure why he and the rest of the team seem to be anti-speaking valve. He really emphasized a decline in quality of life due to inability to speak and increased difficulty in swallowing. In researching valves, it seems like there are a lot of options out there. Why do docs hesitate to use any of the newer technology? I'm scared that my quality of life will decrease if I do the trach.
And I'm going to read the chat because Shelley responded to this. Shelley wrote, my quality of life has improved since being trached. I feel much better than I did before trach surgery. And Gil said, I agree, never leave home without it. And I think that's about the Voxen, Gil. And Kevin said, definitely the best on the market. And then Kevin wrote, Alex, can you tell them about how we do an amount of alone time? Then Alex said, an amount of alone time. Please elaborate.
And Shelley's also said, ALS may take, ALS may take your ability to speak. Having a trach or not won't impact that if you use a speaking valve. Same is true for swallowing. And Gil has said, in response to the question, so many seem to be set in their ways regarding doctors.
And Mary, if you'd like, we can, I'll contact you offline and talk about patient advocacy and see if we can help you out in getting them unstuck. Okay, we'll go with the question, do most insurance companies cover assisted care? And Hope is going to take this one.
Hi, everyone. So this is a difficult question because coverage varies by insurance plan. Most people living with ALS, or quite a few people living with ALS, will be enrolled in Medicare. So Medicare coverage usually will cover, many people think that Medicare will cover the majority of their home health care costs, but in fact, Medicare really only pays for home health care on a short-term and intermittent basis, and when the help is deemed medically necessary. This area of ALS care, specifically in-home caregiving, is one of the most difficult parts to navigate. And one of the most requested assistance that the navigation team sees. For Medicaid, the federal government sets standards of care, but the individual state determines what services are covered. So as a result, home care services covered under Medicaid are different in each state. Many people have health insurance that is provided through an employer's plan or through a privately purchased plan. These policies typically cover medically necessary home health care services, either on a short-term, intermittent, or long-term basis. It really just depends on the individual policy. So when navigating these questions, when we have, for example, a client that is looking to help coordinate in-home care, we usually start by looking and asking what type of insurance coverage they have. Typically, most private insurance plans will have websites and pages specifically dedicated to helping you understand your coverage for these types of things. We often contact the Center for Medicare Advocacy to understand benefits for different Medicare plans. And then we work from there to see what we can do to help people find the in-home care they need if they decide to go the private route. We connect people with financial resources and assistance programs that can provide small grants to help them cover the costs.
Thank you, Hope. I'm going to read a little bit from the chat. And Jay said, we haven't discussed cost. I know every situation is different, but what, if anything, does insurance cover for 24-hour caregiving? Haitala said, are any of you still working? And Kevin said, yes, it is a good balance of not having to sit next to me. That's in reference to the earlier question about being alone. And then Chanel said, I still work 40 hours a week. Okay, I will move on to the next question. It is, what brand or type of portable humidifier have you found is best and most comfortable? And Shelly said she would answer this. And if anybody else has recommendations, please feel free.
I'm not sure of any brand names. I've used several different types. I use a humidifier with my BiPAP and mask at night. Then when I got my trach, I used a humidifier at night, but quickly discovered it was too much moisture. So currently I don't use one, but I found no difference between the two that I have used.
Thanks, Shelley. And in the chat, Gil says, on the go, it is typically just an HME. And in response to the question about how if people are still working, Steve Ziegler says, I still work 40 hours a week as well. And we have Lynn says, Texas home health care with Medicare is awful, and qualifying for Medicaid requires you to be flat broke. Thanks for sharing that, Lynn. We're going to move to the question, I guess it was submitted by Kevin for Alex, his caregiver. Alex, do you mind elaborating on Kevin's question about alone time and how you both navigate that? And in the chat, Alex says, yes, as a caregiver, I try he says microphone's not working. So Alex says, as a caregiver, I try to be within earshot of Kevin in case the Voxen alarm goes off so that I can assist, but I am able to roam around the house and engage in other activities. More often than not, I check on Kevin and make eye contact with him to make sure that he is able to use his eye gaze technology. Thanks, Alex. So we will move to the next question. This one was submitted, and Shelley and Gil and others feel free to answer as well. The question is how and when to do tracheal suction? How many times in a day is too much?
I already touched on this. I don't know if too much can be an issue. You certainly don't want secretion staying in your lungs.
Suction is pretty much as needed. I have a Voxen and the suction is within the device. It takes a few seconds and is painless. You can't really do it too much. You just have to allow a small break in between.
Thank you, Gil. And I'll give a moment just in case anybody else had an answer for that one.
My nurse just told me you can cause irritation or bleeding if you do it too much.
Blake said straight from the nurse's mouth. Shelley, thank your nurse for us. Shelley won't tell us their name because she's afraid we'll steal them. So here is not a question, but a curious inquiry. I am curious about the VA help with 24/7 care. And Shelley and Garrett are going to respond to this. Garrett wrote this out beforehand, so I'll just read it. And so it's based on your VA. Most offer self-directed care programs, but unfortunately limit the hours given. You can choose to live at a spinal cord unit if the VA offers long-term care. You don't have an option if the VA doesn't have long-term care by simply refusing to leave the facility after getting your trach, as they can't force you to leave. That's what I did and why I'm in a non-long-term spinal cord unit. I strongly advise not to go that route, as they are a hospital and won't have a good, and you won't have a good quality of life being there. And Shelley said Steve can answer this for me.
Which question, Shelley?
I can reread. I am curious about the VA help with 24/7 care.
Yeah, in our case, Shelley got her tracheostomy the first part of November, and she was in the hospital for a week. During that time, and we had advocated before she went in the hospital, pushing to get care as soon as we could after the procedure took place. And the social worker and their team jumped on it pretty fast. They had us authorized for a certain amount of care during the day and at night. Then it was just a matter of finding an agency that could have somebody come out. Fortunately for us, within a month, we had Shelley's day nurse, Shannon, out there, and she's been fantastic. So she comes 5 days a week, usually for at least 8 to 10 hours. And then occasionally we have a night nurse as well. But I think the main thing was we were pushing from the start, we were advocating, and it wasn't, in North Carolina, it wasn't that hard to get the care. I know in other places that's not the case, but in the case of North Carolina, it was not super hard. But we did have to push, we did have to mention it, we did have to keep on them, call frequently to see where we're at, to make sure the care came.
Thank you, Steve. And Blake said, Mary, we will get to you right after this question. And then Kevin said, I have to pay for 70 hours a week for private caregivers. And then $, $. And then Shelley wrote 16 hours a day is authorized for me.
And Alex says everyone's support systems are different as well. Some people may have a lot of family support for personal care and may need caregivers for shorter periods of time. Yeah. Mary, I wanted to pass it over to you next, if you still wanted to either chime in on the discussion or ask a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in on this because we just went through this with my upcoming trach and RVA in Portland. So prior to me pushing for this, they have never authorized in-home skilled care for their people, their veterans with ALS. And so I asked them, well, what are they doing? And they said they either go to a nursing home or the family or the spouse takes care of them. So I asked around, and people like Shelley helped me fight this battle and, taught me the right words to use with them, the programs that already exist in the VA directive. So the standardized episode of care, which is SEOC, was what I requested them to do. And I had to do it by filing a congressional complaint, which then triggered them to have to address it. And so they had a big meeting like 2 weeks ago and finally agreed to fund me for receiving care through a contracted service for like 40 some hours a week to start. And then they'll adjust that as my needs increase. The problem is they weren't aware of anyone who provided care. So I found out about Maxim has a national contract with the VA. So I approached Maxim, and Maxim is now recruiting to hire someone to provide those care hours for me. So the funding has been approved, but I still don't have a person. And so I'm probably not going to do the trach until all of that's lined out. But it was a big ordeal, and we had to sort of pave the way for Portland to do it. So if people have questions, I'm happy to be a resource for them on how to approach it with their VA.
Thank you for that, offering that, Mary. If anybody would like to be connected to Mary, you can shoot me an email and I can connect you. Again, my email is michael@iamals.org. And then I am going to read from the chat. Shelley said, without the VA, it would be very expensive. Steve said, your lungs will tell you when suctioning is too much because they will bleed when it is too much. You will see pink in what you are suctioning out. Kevin said, I found Alex on Craigslist. And Jay said, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Shelley. Okay, I'm gonna go to a question for Garrett, which is, what is it like to live in a ventilator skilled nursing home? We only hear stories about managing a trach at home, but that's not an option for every person living with ALS. And so we'd like to learn more about quality of life in a facility. Thank you.
I decided to try living in a vent facility nursing home. The one I was at was nice and had new rooms and equipment. The advantage of a nursing home is meeting new people. There are many downsides of being in a nursing home. One is the lack of experienced staff, as with having ALS. Second is the lack of staff and assisting you in an emergency. I stayed at the facility for 3 months and decided to go back to living in the spinal cord unit at the VA, which is basically a hospital. It really depends on the type of person and what you're comfortable with.
Thank you, Garrett. And I'm going to read from the chat. Kevin said about Alex, he came with a lawnmower and a love seat. Winky smiley face. I wrote bonus. Blake said that is too good. Steve said laughing out loud. I said, Steve, I can see you. You didn't laugh out loud. Shelley got us back on track and said the I AM ALS veterans team is working on resolving the inequalities across the VA. Then we need to work on policy to make in-home skilled nursing available to everybody. And if you want to help Shelley with and the veterans team with their work on this, send me an email and we can connect you. Steve said, inside I was cracking up, and I said, okay, that counts.
Awesome. So our next question is, what does your care team look like and how did you build it? And I'll pass this to Chanel and Steve Hoover first, and then open it up for other panelists or attendees to answer.
Sorry, I was on mute. I guess I'll go first. We have a real good support system for Shelley. I've been her primary caregiver for over 8 years. So I've, just like any caregiver, have learned different things along the way. It's just a progression of new things that you need to learn and get used to and figure out how to do. So we have, in our, my daughter and her family live in the same house with us, so we kind of have some built-in support. And my son and his family live real close. But as far as our caregiver team, Shannon, Shelley, have Shannon poke her head. It's all right. There's Shannon. She's fantastic. She's Shelley's day nurse and does a great job. So we also have an occasional night nurse. But most of Shelley's caregiving is built around our family and Shannon, and that seems to work well. I mean, we're here all the time. One thing that it's kind of a little bit off subject, but we were talking about how to make sure you're watching your pal all the time to make, you can't leave them alone. I just bought a monitor, and at first I tried something that worked over the internet, but that to me was not reliable enough. Sometimes it would go out. So I just bought just a baby monitor, and I carry that with me wherever I go. So if I go outside, or if I'm doing something, or if I'm back in my office working, I'm just always watching that monitor and listening to it. And that seems to work real well for us.
When first coming home with the trach and vent, home health services were obtained. The hospital arranged for the care before leaving the hospital. I was supposed to receive home health care from a LPN or RN from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., Monday, Friday. My husband and other family members were trained on trach care before leaving the hospital also. My husband became an expert on my care and had to train the nurses on my specific care. We have gone through many nurses. Finding quality, reliable and caring home health care has been very tough. Initially, I didn't want my daughters involved with my care. At the time, they were 13 and 12. I didn't want to consume their teens with the responsibility of helping to care for their mother. However, they were eager to help, and someone explained the importance of others knowing how to care for me, other than my husband, if possible. We also pulled in my mom and my sister. Eventually, my girls went off to college and the home health care became less and less reliable. Since the pandemic, I have been without a nurse and they are still searching for one. My husband has absorbed total care for me, with my mom assisting when needed. I suggest getting the people you feel comfortable with and trust involved in your care team. It's a lot on one person. If available to you, home health can be very helpful too.
In the chat, Gil said the ALS comedy tour, we will be here until Friday. And then Blake said, here's the veteran community team page with a link, and a reminder, I'll be emailing that out. Gil said Alexa works great as well. Garrett said, I created an ad on Indeed for a private live-in caregiver, and I had many people apply. I think that was many. Garrett, correct me if I'm wrong. Yep, there's none. You must set up a monthly budget and have backup support in case of emergency. And then Shelly said, we should go up on a stand-up, a sit-down comedy tour. And then Shelly, Sunny said, at Shelly, tell everybody the name of your future memoir.
Awesome. And I think Shelly will put that in the chat. So we'll move on to the next question. Shelly says, life at butt level is the name of her memoir. So this was submitted in the chat earlier. Shelly mentioned in the previous video that she had received a particular type of trach. What determines which type a person receives? The reason I ask is because I'm using non-invasive ventilation 24/7. My speech and ability to swallow are still unaffected. I remove my mask and hold my breath to eat and take pills.
Hey everybody, I'm Shannon, Shelley's nurse, and I've been a home health trach vent nurse for about 25 years. There are so many different kinds of trachs out there, and that really will be decided upon with your ENT/pulmonologist based on the length that you need or the diameter of the lumen inside. That's how they decide that. I will just add that when trying to find home health care, there are several agencies out there and there are several kind of nurses. And what I've always said to my patients and the people I train is I know within 5 minutes when somebody comes in that door whether or not you're going to work in and you're going to work well in that home. I can teach you any skill on the planet, just like somebody can teach you how to run your new washing machine or your new computer. But there has to be a bond and a connection when it comes to working in a home. You need to be ready to have the grandkids running around. You need to be able to know if they have pets. You have to be able to connect with people, and you typically know that within 5 minutes. And it's not about knowing all the skills up here, because trachs to me and ventilators to me are just like a radio or a laptop for some people. You get used to it. You hear a sound and you know, uh-oh, I gotta go now. But some sounds, when the ventilator goes off, you're like, all good. It's about trial and error and practice. And I can go to the bathroom, I can walk to my car, I can get on the phone. I know when Shelly needs me because we have a backup plan. We have a system. And Shelly qualifies for a lot more hours than I can provide because we need more nurses doing this. COVID has tired all of us out, all caregivers. So it's about a team approach. I want everyone in this home to know how to change a trach because I might not be here. And Steve has seen it and he needs to know. And the daughter needs to know. And one day when Emmy gets big enough, the grandson, he needs to know. Because you never know when you might need it. It's about a team approach, whether it's the neighbor that comes over and becomes your new part of your caregiving team or what. So that's just my input as a trach vent nurse for 25 years. It's not as scary as you think. It's just new.
Thank you. I told you she's the best.
I will read a little from the chat. We use a baby monitor sometimes as well. One other thing that has worked well is texting my wife. She has a smartwatch and can receive my texts, so she's able to do things around the house. Justin said, love the humor. Unfortunately, I have to hop off, but thanks to the panelists for your time and insight. Stay strong and keep fighting, everyone. Chanel is thinking what I'm sure everyone is thinking. Shelly, can Shannon come to Virginia? We can share, laughing out loud. And I can answer that for you. Shelly's going to say no. Oh, you're muted. Let me unmute you.
She wants to get to Mary also.
Okay. We'll invent teleporters. Hope said this article offers information regarding the different types of in-home care workers. And I added that to the links that I'll be sending out. And Gil said, I agree. The stigma is scary. I think we've answered this question, but I'll read it out just in case anybody else has an answer to this, and I will read it and then give everybody a few moments just in case there's somebody who wants to chime in. Does anyone use the Voxen machine? It stands for ventilator, oxygen, cough assist, suction, and nebulizer all in one machine. Any recommendations for or against? And we heard a lot of positive things about it, but we'll pause for a second to see if anybody else wants to add their thoughts.
So I have. Sorry, I have just one quick input. So Steve and I looked into using the Voxen machine, and with our ventilator, we have a respiratory therapist and a team that supports it. So they come out to our house and provide supplies and everything. So when we looked into using the Voxen, the home health team that supports our ventilator didn't support the Voxen. So if we did switch to that, we would lose our respiratory therapist. So I think it was just a question of, whether or not the providers you're using are used to it and it's an option for you. And it really wasn't for us. So we decided to stick with the Trilogy.
Thank you, Lynn. Bernice in the chat said, thanks, Hope. I just read the article, but couldn't find the information I was looking for. What type of aid is needed for trach in-home care? CNA, LN? Thanks. And we will add that to the questions. And Jay said, I never heard of it from my ALS clinical providers. And then Alex says, Kevin uses the Voxen and he highly recommends it. Before, he had several different machines for each function, which made the back of his power chair quite bulky. As a caregiver, it is simple to use, and the customer service and respiratory therapists are a great help when we have questions or have troubleshooting problems. Thank you, Alex. Lynn said, I can't eat, this is different, Lynn. I can't eat with a full face mask, but I stumbled upon a nasal mask for my trilogy. Was hard to convince my reseller to supply it, but now I can eat and breathe, and then parentheses, minimal bulbar. Thank you, Lynn. Next is, what is your ability to still stand or move with assistance? And we're going to go to Chanel and Shelley.
I am a quadriplegic. Unfortunately, I'm unable to move at all. I only have use of my left thumb. I use my left thumb to activate bells, just in case my eye gets hung and I'm unable to communicate.
I've been in a wheelchair pretty much since I was diagnosed. I lost the use of my arms several years ago. So, like Chanel, I'm functionally acquired, but I know people with a trach and can still walk and use their arms. So it's as very as ALS is.
Thank you, Chanel and Shelley. And another question about mobility. How does a trach affect your ability to travel? And Chanel and Steve.
The trach and vent haven't impacted my ability to travel. I love traveling. Actually, in May we will be traveling from Virginia to New Orleans. We vacation every year and I have also cruised with the trach and vent. We have a wheelchair accessible van and always take supplies with us when traveling on vacation or going anywhere outside of the home. The supply bag includes suction machine, cough assist machine, charger, extra trach, extra peg tube, feeding supplies, trach supplies, extra vent batteries, an ambu bag. We keep the bag packed ready. When vacationing, we add a second vent and the chest compression machine. The key to traveling is being prepared. Make sure where you book to stay can accommodate your needs.
And one thing I would say on traveling, just to add to what Steve said, is something you wouldn't think of if you're using a lift to move your pal around. Most of the beds in hotels won't have raised. They won't. The foundation of the bed is a box. In other words, it's solid down there, and you can't get your lift underneath the bed. So if you can, try to request that it's raised up on regular rails so that you can get your lift underneath the bed.
and I'll read from the chat. Gil said, I love mine, especially since I get out of the house, and that's about the Voxen. Shelley said LPN or RN for skilled care. Family members or other caregivers can be trained on all aspects of care. Garrett Smith said, most vent facility nursing homes won't support the Voxen because they feel if anything breaks on it, they have to send the entire machine in for repair. I personally feel like it is a great machine. The VA refuses to get me one. Bernice says, thank you, Shelley. Or thanks, Shelley. Sorry, Bernice.
And Hope says, Shelley is correct, Bernice. Skilled care providers such as nurses and LPNs, generally speaking, the tasks that skilled care providers perform are those that require specialized knowledge and advanced training to do safely. Thanks, Hope. And Steve Ziegler says, when I was on non-invasive ventilation, I used a nasal pillow mask and was able to continue to eat and drink for several years. Thanks, Steve. And Bernice says, got it. Thanks, Hope. Our next question, I know we're running up kind of on time, and we can do a time check-in in just a moment. And the next question is open to any of our panelists or attendees. Does having a trach prevent or reduce CO2 buildup? And I'll give everyone just another moment, and then if not, we can circle back and try to find the answer through our community support team. And in the chat, Sunny says, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Zieglers did a cool GoPro video traveling to/from DC while being well equipped. Is it on YouTube? And Lynn says, thanks for everything.
I think if it's the video I'm thinking of, I think it's just on Facebook. So there's a Facebook group called Traveling with ALS, I think is what it's called. And we posted it on there. It was non-invasive ventilation. So Steve didn't have a trach at the time, but we still he was on his BiPAP 24/7. So we traveled on a plane and bus and everything else in between. But we can I'll have Steve send a link if anyone's interested in looking at it.
Thanks, Lynn. And I'm going to drop another link in the chat to a Facebook resource guide that we have that links out to the Traveling with ALS Facebook group as well. So I think what we'll do is move to the next question. And if any of the panelists have an answer to the question about CO2 buildup, please just let us know and we'll be sure to circle back to that one. Next question is, I work from home 50 hours a week. Is it possible to still provide care and work full-time? No home health. And that one is directed to Chanel and Lamont and Steve Hoover.
It's definitely possible, but could be a lot of stress on the caregiver. I think it depends on the type of job you have. If you are in meetings majority of the day, your employer will need to understand that you may have to periodically step away. We currently don't have home health available and my husband is working from home and caring for me. I'm also still working from home. There are occasions I need suction or other stuff and he has to juggle a phone call / meeting to tend to me. It can become a lot for both of us, but it's possible. From the pal's perspective, I try to wait until absolutely necessary to ask for something, to be considerate of him working. It's sometimes hard. Vent starts beeping, LOL. My husband is right here. He may have something to add from his perspective, since we're in this exact situation.
It's we make it work, you know, you have to be flexible. And because Chanel works and she has meetings scheduled and things of that nature, we try to make sure we always know what each other may have going on and try to schedule things around that. So it's just being flexible. And I think what Chanel said, having a job that allows the flexibility.
Yeah, and I would agree with everything Chanel said. It probably really depends on the type of job that you have, because, you know, when your pal needs you, you need to drop whatever you're doing and go, you know, go deal with whatever's going on. So in my case, my son and I run a durable medical equipment company. So he's the one out on the road all the time, and I do a lot of the back office stuff. Fortunately for us, we have Shannon that comes in 5 days a week, but I work a lot on the weekends as well. And so typically, you just have to make sure if you're doing something that needs a lot of concentration, that you're going to occasionally have to break away, not just for suctioning, but also for you know, Shelly has a peg tube, so she'll have to eat occasionally. But it's certainly doable. It's just a different way of working than what you're probably used to.
And in the chat, Garrett says, anyone can be trained how to care for you. I agree. It's definitely a plus if you find skilled nursing. I really believe it depends on the type of person you meet and hire. They must be caring and have compassion. And Shelley says, Garrett nailed it. Care and compassion are key. Jay submitted a question. Can you eat by mouth with a trach? And we'll get to that in just a second. Hope says, as you navigate what works for you and your loved one, this article may be helpful to read. It discusses how to identify caregiver burnout. And we'll be sure to share that in the post-event email as well. And Shelley says, Jay, I eat dessert.
Hey. Jill said, Shelly eats? I thought she lived on advocacy. And Jay said, brownies, we know. Okay, I won't tell any of Shelly's secrets. What can be done to prevent more lung infections from happening? And do you think that switching over from Trilogy Vent to Voxen will help with better quality of life? And we have Gil and Shelley who will offer their thoughts on this.
You want me to go ahead? Yeah. Okay. Like Lynn, I had trouble getting a vaccine because of my home respiratory program. I do fine with the trilogy, but we just have to carry a big suction machine when we go out. I think the key is to have some movement. You have to have some range of motion, moving your torso with help so secretions don't become stagnant in your lungs. My bed rotates all night, left to right every 5 minutes, and I believe that keeps my secretions moving. I think pneumonia can happen more easily if you remain still.
Lung infections are a real concern. Some people have them often, some people don't. Cleanliness is the best preventive measure. Keeping equipment clean, keeping the trach site clean, and of course being vigilant about exposure to illnesses. Also being proactive when there are signs or symptoms of an infection is important. Stay ahead of the game as much as you can. As far as the device and quality of life, I do believe that having all of your therapies in one device does make it more convenient, especially if you still are interested in getting out. If you prefer to just be at home, then I don't think it matters as much. I love my vaccine though. I have used the trilogy as well.
Thanks, team. In the chat, I just put, we have just a few questions left and we'll continue for another 15 minutes if our panelists are okay with that. Panelists, if you need to go, please just let us know. Steve has also said in the chat, here's the link to the Vimeo of us traveling to Washington, DC. Thank you. We'll put that in the post event email as well. Whoops, I just opened it. And Alex has said, props to you both, Chanel and Lamont. I hope you two are setting out some time for some self-care. Having one person care for you / caring for one person for so long can be tough, no matter how much you love them. Even a couple hours a week can be recharging for both parties. Smiley face. Our next question is, do PALs travel in their personal van or do you have to go by ambulance? And I believe we have that for Steve Ziegler and others if they want to chime in too.
Certainly, PALs can travel in their personal van or by ambulance. It is really a matter of the resources available. You would need a wheelchair to move the PALs and a wheelchair accessible vehicle. You may also consider adding an inverter to your accessible vehicle. This will allow you to plug in the various pieces of equipment while you are traveling. You would also need to think ahead a bit about things that you might need while you are away from the home. This might include things like a spare trach, spare circuit, also known as a hose, portable suction machine, etc. Some PALs make the decision to not leave the house, or in some instances, not leave their bed very often. They may not be comfortable in a wheelchair or may just not be comfortable leaving the house. For these PALs, it may not make sense to own a wheelchair accessible vehicle. They can contract an ambulance to transport them to necessary appointments. One more note on wheelchair accessible vehicles. They can be pretty expensive. If you need a wheelchair accessible vehicle for seldom uses, like appointments, vacations, etc., you may be able to rent a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Many wheelchair accessible vehicle dealers have a rental program. Check with your local dealer and see if they have rentals available.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I'm going to go to chat and Hope said, agree to Alex. Here's an article offering self-care tips for caregivers, and we'll add that to our list of links we'll send out. And Chanel said, thanks so much. And then Shelly said, I can eat soft foods like I did before the trach, but I'm lazy and I eat via tube. I save my energy for eating desserts. And Gil said, that's what I'm talking about. And I am next with, does getting a tracheostomy help with disrupted sleep patterns? And Shelly signed up for this one.
I think I sleep better with a trach than with the mask. I hated them full face masks at night and would wake up often with the mask on. So for me, it helped. Understanding can probably answer about the CO2 buildup if you want to answer that one.
You're gonna go to the doctor every 3 to 6 months. You're gonna have blood work taking. They're going to check your bicarb levels to see what you could be building up. And then that's when the pulmonologist, ENT doc, whichever one really is the primary handling the respiratory care, is going to adjust the vent settings to just to match whatever your body is giving off. Vent is really in charge, and we have to tweak those numbers based on how the patient's feeling, what the secretions look like, that kind of thing. That's how you really kind of keep up with the CO2 numbers.
And thank you for answering that. Bernice said, sorry, I have to go. Thanks, everyone. This is super helpful. And Chanel said, I hated the mask and couldn't sleep with it.
All right, we're down to just 2 questions. The second to last one, unless there's others submitted in the chat, is a trach reversible? And Steve Ziegler, we have you as being ready to answer that one.
The technical answer is yes, a tracheostomy can be reversed. However, for most PALS, this is not possible. In order to have the trachea removed, the PALS must regain muscular function such that they can effectively protect their airway and breathe on their own. This rarely occurs with PALS, as ALS is a degenerative disease. I am only aware of one PALS that had a tracheostomy and had his symptoms reversed to the point to where he was able to remove the trach.
Did you know that? He's gone.
Thank you, Steve. And we have, here is our last, and this is also for Steve. Do you need to have a generator on hand if you get a trach? If so, suppose you live in a condo or apartment. They aren't allowed. What do you do then?
my Steve could talk. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
It is highly recommended that you have some sort of alternative power source available if you have an extended power outage. The ventilators all have batteries for reserve power which last anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. You can purchase smaller portable generators which can power your equipment when the power goes out. You can also purchase generators capable of powering your whole house during a power outage. Having a generator for backup power will give you some peace of mind. If you are in a situation where you are not allowed to have a generator, the first thing I would try is explaining your situation to your landlord, leasing company, or homeowners association. Tell them that it is a medical necessity and see if they will grant you an exception. If that does not work, you can purchase battery banks, also called portable power stations. These portable power stations are big battery packs that you can charge when you have power and then store them. When the power goes out, the batteries provide 110 volt AC power for your equipment. Some manufacturers of these portable power stations are Jackery, EcoFlow, Tenergy, and others. These can be purchased on Amazon. There is some effort required to make sure that you are getting the right size generator or power station for your needs. You need to figure out how much power you need and how long your power source will last before refueling or recharging. There are tutorials online that can help guide you to the right solution.
Thank you, Steve. Steve Hoover, did you want to chime in too, or?
No, Steve covered pretty much all of it. We had in our house in California, we had a Generac whole house generator, which was great because the power was going off quite often out there. Before that, I had a portable Honda generator, which was sufficient to charge all of Shelly's equipment. Obviously, that's not going to run like an air conditioner or anything like that. The only thing I would add that Steve didn't cover is you can contact your power companies as well, and you have to fill out a form and have your usually you have to have your doctor sign it, but that will put you on a priority restoration. So if the power does go out in your area, they'll try to get the power back for those on that who have a medical need first. That really does. I would highly suggest having some sort of backup power, though. The generator was, in our case, was great.
Thank you, Steve. And Garrett said, I sleep a solid 6 hours with the help of my meds. Though when I do wake up, I tend to stretch every time I wake, which is annoying. It's like having a full body spasm. And then Hope said for further information regarding ALS and emergency preparedness planning considerations, it may be helpful to watch this webinar. And there's a link. And then Gil said, many power companies also prioritize medical necessity.
Well, if there's no additional questions, and as I talk, feel free to add any others, we will wrap today's Ask Me Anything Trach Round 2. I wanted to thank all the panelists and everyone who's attending today and as the first conversation as well for being here, asking questions, participating in the discussion. Shelly says, thank you everyone in the chat. I did want to just share again that our community support specialist, our ALS support specialist navigation team can help answer any additional questions, help you find resources about trachs or really anything regarding ALS. And they are also amazing when helping with the emotional impact of making the decision to get a trach and living with ALS and navigating the ALS landscape. So I'm going to drop their email in the chat as well. And of course, we will share that in an email after the event. And we will, as we mentioned, we're recording this, so we'll post the video on YouTube and share that out as well afterwards. We'd love for you to share it with anyone else you know who wasn't able to make it today. I will read the chat one more time. Gil says, thanks for joining us. Chanel and Lamont say, thanks everyone. Vicky says, thanks everyone for the information and support. Jay Kenny says, thank you so much, panelists. Steve says, thanks for coming. Michael has DM'd me saying thank you, and Michael, thank you too. And Garrett says, thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you, everyone, so much. We hope to see you soon at another event.